All right, as this story out of Global News says, Trudeau says Wilson-Raybould, Philpott are welcome to run as Liberals in federal election, and this comes as hilarious propaganda pieces are being pushed forward at the peak of this massive controversy involving Justin Trudeau. And the SNC-Lavalin scandal, which is minor compared to many of the other things he says, but nonetheless, after Wilson-Raybould came out and testified against him as he was pushing to save SNC-Lavalin from major charges regarding things that they did in Libya and elsewhere. Because it's in Quebec, in his riding, he wanted to save his riding. He wanted to save himself in the next election because he didn't want jobs to flee from the area. More dirty stuff by politicians. That's kind of their job, guys. That is the job of a politician as an organized criminal. Especially someone like scumbag Justin Trudeau. Finally, my yelling at him in his face a couple years ago, people are starting to realize why I did it and what kind of person he is. But anyway, as this article says, commentary, Justin Trudeau needs to remove Judy, Wilson-Raybould, and Jane Philpott from caucus. Hilarious. Tasha Curidan, as it shows, is a writer of this article. This is a good old-fashioned propaganda piece, veiled as commentary, the usual stuff. As the article says, how much longer will Prime Minister Justin Trudeau allow Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott to remain in the federal Liberal caucus? In Ottawa, that question dominates the conversation, from cocktail parties to cab rides. It started after Philpott's extraordinary sortie in Maclean's, where she said that there's much more to the story that needs to be told. It reached a boiling point when Wilson-Raybould promised to provide copies of text messages and emails to the Justice Committee that would further clarify statements I made, elucidate the accuracy and nature of statements by witnesses in testimony that came after the committee appearances. What's next? People are asking. A tell-all on the National? Oh, yeah, that's great. A tell-all. I'm sure they'll tell all on the CBC, state-run media propaganda corporation. Anyway, it's almost as though the two women are daring Trudeau to expel them, daring him to repudiate his status as a champion of feminism, Indigenous rights, and doing politics differently. It's as if they're daring him to act like any other leader, Stephen Harper, Jean Chrétien, or his father, the late Pierre Trudeau, would have done and assert his authority over wayward MPs. It's not like Trudeau hasn't done that before. In 2014, he took a number of decisive actions. In November of that year, when Liberal MPs Massimo Passetti and Scott Andrews were accused of sexual misconduct by two NDP MPs, Trudeau expelled them from caucus without hesitation or any semblance of due process, which is funny because, people have accused Justin Trudeau of similar things. Is he going to expel himself? Probably not. In May, Trudeau issued a fatwa against any MP or aspiring candidate who didn't support abortion rights by denying them the opportunity to run for the party. And in January, Trudeau expelled 32 members of the Senate from the Liberal caucus for no other reason than that they were Liberals and he wanted to take a stand in light of the Senate expenses scandal. Taken together, these acts burnished his feminist credentials, bolstered his doing things differently mantra, and cast him as decisive to boot. So why hesitate now? What is it that Trudeau fears? What do Wilson-Raybould and Philpott know, or could they say, if he casts them out of caucus? Speculation runs rampant, but some scenarios appear more plausible than others. The main one is that SNC-Lavalin wasn't the starting point for the women's discontent, but only a convenient tipping point. The theory is that other issues, the government's failure to settle Indigenous land claims, the lack of material advancement on First Nations issues, are really what made them mad. They may have concluded that Trudeau's embrace of these causes was a fraud, mere virtue signaling for votes, and they weren't going to take it anymore. It is interesting to note that a spokesperson for new Attorney General David Lametti just confirmed that Wilson-Raybould's directives on First Nation litigation will be respected. 20 guidelines that profoundly change the way the Crown will prosecute Indigenous lawsuits, and which encourage settlement out of court. Okay, so I've had enough of this article. I want to mention something that stands out here. It's that, and we've seen this before with Harper. Harper expelled MPs that thought differently from him, that criticized him, all that kind of stuff. This is politics in a nutshell. This push to expel people who differ in thought. And this is another example why government not only is organized crime and it's just a giant cartel that decides things for you, but that this representational government is nonsense, because when it comes down to it, these representatives represent massive ridings with a bunch of people who all think differently, and maybe they got the majority, maybe a little by little majority. But nonetheless, there's still a vast amount of people that didn't get their way and are being enforced at the point of a gun by the state to go by other people's rules, because other people's ideas are so good they require force. No, that's not a thing. Good ideas do not require force. But nonetheless, the idea that the crime boss can expel some of their henchmen from their seats, their chairs, their fancy chairs in some fancy hall where people debate what form of enslavement they want to enforce on the populace. It's more nonsense that also concludes that no, replacing the puppet isn't going to change the problem. This has been going on since ancient Greece, folks. This has been going on forever. When will people learn that government can't replace government, government can't cure government, cancer doesn't cure cancer, kerosene doesn't put out fire? Again and again and again I say this, and no one seems to listen except for some of you that watch us here at Wham. It's this issue of, religion, statism. These people are on their knees begging for the state to help them, and when the state does terrible things that are right out in the open, like we saw with SNC-Lavalin, and this push to potentially just expel people who dare to differ from the views of their master rather than potentially the people that elected them, quote unquote. When we see that, people just go, oh yeah, but we need government to fix this problem. We need the politicians to fix this problem. We're so dependent. We're slaves. We want them to help us because we love the chains we revere so much. It's hard to free them from the chains we revere, as I believe Voltaire once said. And it's just so absurd, guys. This is people begging for the chapel, the state, the legislative building, begging while hugging the flag, the cross, going to the Sunday school courses of schools, watching the media, the televangelists, and singing the national anthem, the hymns, begging their religious overlords, the state, to help them and free them from the chains that state put on them in the first place. Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution, repeat for eternity. Well, maybe the next guy will change things up. Change, change, change. That has been the mantra of every single election campaign since the beginning of so-called democracy in ancient Greece. It has never worked. Thousands of years have gone by. We still haven't learned. And we always answer after a couple years, 4, 8, 5, whatever country you live in, or whatever amount of terms or size of the terms are. We always beg, well, maybe we'll fix it by doing this again and again and again and again. Why are my paychecks getting smaller? Why is my purchasing power diminishing? Why can't I afford things anymore? Why am I going broke? And why are there more regulations and rules and laws enforced on me? And why am I scared every time a cop is behind me while I'm driving down the street? Why do I feel uncomfortable when these guys look at me? Why am I unable to do this or that without potentially getting my kids kidnapped by the government? And why can't I just exchange goods for services without them extorting me? All this kind of stuff, all these questions are always seemingly met with, okay, well, maybe we'll change the puppet in power, quote unquote, not questioning this idea of power because we've been so indoctrinated over our entire life and conformed and normalized in our minds this idea of statism and government controlling us, collectivism, and it begets collectivism. You can cut 95% of that tumor off, folks, but you leave 5% left, and what do you think is going to happen? That tumor is going to continuously grow. Individual responsibility is the hallmark of freedom itself, and individual responsibility is the route that we should all be taking rather than begging for help from the state that always seems to restrict our free will, and they basically only benefit benefit from extorting people and pushing people into further servitude and dependence. The more in control they are of the populace, the better off they are. Of course they're going to push everything into that direction. Of course they're going to print money out of thin air and push everyone into debt. Of course they're going to push this idea that it's caring and fair to extort people more and put them into more servitude and control them more because it's fair and it's nice and it's the best. No. Imagine the mental gymnastics. Well, it's worked. And people have become so conformed to this ideology of statism that they just accept it. They've accepted it. They look at anything, any other ideas breaking outside of that box as horrible and just terrible and extremism. And it's not extremist to trust this entity that thinks it has a moral, a moral authority over us, despite killing hundreds of millions of people and extorting everyone, being the top thief in the world, the top kidnapper, the top polluter, all these things, and then they'll come in and stop thieves and kidnappers and murderers and polluters. When will we learn? Anyway, anything the government says, it's usually the opposite. I mean, what's fair to them is actually extortion, and what's actually fair in reality to them is corruption. Take any small business, and as Trudeau says, poor people don't pay taxes, and as Trudeau says, small businesses are just shell corporations. Meanwhile, he has a bunch of shell corporations, and at the same time, he's never spent a second of his life poor because he's been on trust funds. This is why I called him a scumbag. Anyway, thanks for joining us, everyone. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change. Like what you see here, WAM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so heavily demonetized and censored by YouTube as these guys come in and flag all of our content as hate speech. The shadow banning is getting really bad, guys. Also, check our Bitcoin address right here on the screen or in the description below. We really appreciate it. And of course, check us out at the Red Pill Expo 2019. Of course, the great G. Edward Griffin and so many other incredible speakers will be there. Our link for that is below as well. And we cannot forget Mike Maloney's goldsilver.com, which you can also find in the description. One of the greatest market and monetary historians out there. We really encourage everyone to check that out. But until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.